As human beings, we play games, don't we? And I'm not just talking about Monopoly or Trivial Pursuits, I'm talking about behavioural and psychological games. Human interaction can be complex and sometimes difficult to figure out. So in order to navigate those tricky social waters, we engage in a variety of different games. And some of these games are of course necessary, they're worthwhile and sometimes even essential when it comes to our social survival. But others are not. We can get pulled into games that seem like a good idea at the time, but end up being both damaging to ourselves and potentially other people. So in this episode of the Stress Less Living podcast, we're going to be taking a look at 5 toxic games that you just don't want to be drawn into. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy route or the hard route, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So let's get started. So in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at 5 toxic games in life that you just don't want to be drawn into. So these are psychological and behavioural patterns that are quite easy to fall into as human beings because other people are doing them and of course we want to fit in, but they end up just being zero-sum games where playing them almost always ends up with a bad outcome for someone, and that someone can frequently be you. They're also games that can be very tempting because it seems like we're getting something good from them initially, but almost always in the long run, you end up losing more than you gain. This is also not an extensive list. You may want to add your own toxic games to this one, but these 5 just seem to crop up quite a lot. So, number 1 is the blame game. So this is where if something happens that doesn't quite work out for you, you take absolutely no responsibility for it and you blame it entirely on other people or external circumstances. So there's an idea that's taken from NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming, that you can either live at cause or effect. So to explain that, so effect is where you believe that the world is entirely responsible for your life situation in the way that you currently feel about it. Whereas if you live life more at cause, then you believe that you have responsibility for where you are right now and you can take charge of it and do something about it. And it's not about just shifting the blame onto you. Of course, that's not what this is all about. It's about looking at what you can do, what's within your power to help you change your situation for the better. And also, life is not black and white like this, is it? There are many shades of grey in between being at cause and being at effect. But if you are at the extreme side of effect, then you are effectively paralysed. You become a passive actor in what can sometimes be a terrible movie. You strip yourself of all personal power and choice. Whereas if you do live life more from a place of cause, then it's a much more empowered position to be in. You can actually do something about your life situation. Now, like I said, it doesn't mean that you're to blame, and it doesn't mean that external factors don't play a part. Of course they do. And some people and organisations have a lot to answer for, they definitely do, but living life more from cause opens you up to new choices. It lets you see what you can do to make a difference. So just to share a story, I remember a number of years ago I was doing a corporate training for a local council and we were talking about stress. And one of the delegates put their hands up and she said that she had recently been to a CBT therapist and they had confirmed that her stress was entirely caused by her employer, the council. Now, aside from the fact that this doesn't sound like a particularly great CBT therapist, having that attitude means that you can't really do anything about it. Now, I'm sure that her employer definitely had a lot to answer for. I'm not absolving them of all responsibility. But when we set the game up in this way, we do do become paralysed. We can't do anything about it. But irrespective of the situation that you're in, we always have choice, even if that choice is just how we interpret it and how we choose to respond to it. And when we stop playing the blame game and we look at what we do have influence over, then we can start to do things that actually make a positive difference so that we can move things forward. So that's game number one. Game number two is putting other people down to make yourself look good. So the self-help mega guru Tony Robbins has a great turn of phrase. He says that there's two ways to have the tallest building. Number one is to tear all the other buildings down, and number two is to do everything you can to make your building the very best it can be. And so many people take the first option when really they should be focusing all of their energy on the second. And look, I get it. It's hard not to criticise others, especially sometimes. It's hard not to have a wee bit of a moan every now and again, because as human beings, one of the things we love more than anything else is to feel significant and also to feel right and justified. And we get both of these when we criticise others. It can be bewitchingly intoxicating to criticise and bring other people down. And I'll be totally honest and say that I'm not completely immune to doing this. In certain company, I will occasionally criticise others, especially if I see something that I don't like or agree with. But I do like to think that I do it with a positive intention and not to try to fill some kind of gaping psychological void. And I think that's the difference. It's okay to occasionally critique others because you're passionate about what you do and you want to influence change in a positive way. But it becomes toxic when you spend so much of your time and energy doing it. And in particular, when you do it in a way that brings other people down just to make you feel significant, to fuel your ego. In other words, to make you feel like you've got the tallest building because you've actually just torn every other one down. I remember about 15 years ago, I went to see a motivational speaker called Robin Seeger. He was very popular back in the noughties. I don't know what he's up to now, but he was absolutely fantastic. And in his keynote speech, he said something quite profound that stuck with me. He said that if you were to walk around every square inch of London, you'll come across over 1,500 statues. And not one of those statues is a critic. And that's because in our culture, we just don't value critics. We value people who build things, people who create and serve, those who are focused on building as big and beautiful a building as they possibly can. So I know it can be tempting to pull other people down, especially to make us feel significant if maybe we're going through hard times, but ultimately it is a toxic game. At the end of the day, people won't respect you doing that, and it's also a monumental waste of energy that you can be using to create the kind of life that you want to create. So, you're a busy person, you have a demanding job or a hectic lifestyle, and you've heard that meditation is a great way to reduce stress and create calm within the chaos that is your life. But you've tried meditation a few times, maybe with an app or from a book or a YouTube video, and it's just not really worked for you, and you've maybe jumped to the conclusion that meditation isn't for you. Well, if that's the case, I just want to say that it's most likely not your fault. A lot of the time when meditation doesn't really work that well, it's because you're missing a couple of key steps. And if you want to learn what those key steps are and some of the fundamentals of meditation, then I have a free video training that you can enrol on. If you want to check that out, I've included a link to it in the show notes and all the information that you need. So that's toxic game number 2 that you want to avoid. Number 3 is a bit of a follow-on, and it is malicious gossip. So here's the thing. As human beings, we like to talk. We gossip. And we gossip a lot. In fact, one of the main reasons why we are the dominant species on the planet is because of our ability to communicate ideas quickly and efficiently from person to person. And a big part of that, of course, happens through gossip. So I've heard people say that you shouldn't engage in gossip at all, but to stop gossiping completely is to deny one of the key things that makes us human. So that's going to be pretty hard, if not impossible to do. However, you don't want to be engaging in deliberate malicious gossip, where you go out your way to spread damaging comments, rumours about other people. This could be in the workplace or within your social circles. This is a game that you just do not want to be drawn into. So most people who engage with this do it to feel part of the group. And again, I totally get that. This yearning to belong is super strong for human beings. But while it may feel like you're building a relationship with these people by gossiping with them, that relationship is ultimately being built on unhealthy foundations. In the long term, it just creates mistrust, doubt, and insecurity. Because the thing is, if you're gossiping about someone with them, what's to say that when you're not there, they're gossiping about you? And that's going to always be on your mind. And that's where the mistrust, that's where the doubt and insecurity creeps in. And it won't just be for you, it'll be for practically everybody in that peer group. Also, the more that you do it, the more people will start to mistrust you. Your social currency will decline, especially with people who don't like that kind of thing. So the reality is, in the long term, you'll end up repelling the honest people who like to have healthy relationships, and you'll attract more of the toxic ones who love to spread damaging rumours, and I'm sure you just don't want that. And this often happens through stealth as well. Before you know it, good people don't want much to do with you because they don't trust you. And why would they? Because you've been seen time and time again to stick the knife into other people too often. So you don't want to be getting pulled into that game. And instead, it can actually work wonders if you do the opposite. So there's a great book called How to Make Anyone Like You by Liel Lowndes, well worth checking out. And she likes to flip gossip on its head. So she says that you want to do your best to get caught saying good things or nice things about other people. So maybe you know someone who has a good sense of humour. The next time you're in a conversation with people who know them, you can just drop it into the conversation. You can say, oh, you know Kathy? Oh yeah, she's hilarious. She's got such an amazing sense of humour. And be specific with the compliment as well. The more specific, the more powerful it tends to be when it eventually gets round to that person. So you can think of this as positive gossip. And the difference this can make to your social currency is incredible. Eventually, word gets round, people start to like, admire, and trust you. Your value goes up, and you become someone who people are naturally drawn to because you're making people feel good. Why wouldn't they be drawn to you rather than trying to just be part of the group through malicious gossip? So there is an exception to this, and this is a very rare exception, and this is if you're spreading first-hand information. I would suggest this is good gossip. You know, sometimes when people have genuinely been wronged or they've been manipulated or they have been harmed in some way, sometimes they can keep quiet because they don't want to be seen as someone who is spreading information, you know, behind people's backs. But I think in that instance where someone has genuinely been harmed and the gossip prevents future harm, then I think that is the rare exception where this is okay. But any other circumstances, you don't want to be drawn into that game. So that is toxic game number 3. Toxic game number 4 is instant gratification. So this is a big one, especially nowadays. So there's a thing from behavioural psychology, I don't know if you've heard of it before, called the present bias. And this is the idea that there is a tendency for people to prioritise immediate rewards over future rewards, even when the future reward is of greater value. That we tend to see things that are further off in the future as less meaningful than what is happening right now. So for example, if you try telling a teenager to start putting money away for a pension, they'll look at you like you're insane. I remember the very first job I got was an apprenticeship in the oil and gas industry with BP, and I still remember to this day some of the older guys who were probably younger than I am now were saying to me, you need to put extra money into a pension. And I was like, what? I'm only interested in having enough money to go out with the weekend. What are you talking about? This is an example of the present bias. So there's a famous study called the marshmallow test, and it was carried out by Walter Mischel in the 1960s to test children's ability to delay gratification. So the kids were all offered a marshmallow, and told that they could either eat it immediately or wait 15 minutes and receive a second marshmallow as a reward. And pretty much every single time, the kid wouldn't wait for that 15 minutes. They wanted the marshmallow now, so they grabbed it and they ate it. That was end of story. Also, what the study found was that the few children who were actually able to delay gratification and hold off for those 15 minutes ended up having better outcomes in life. They had higher SAT scores and also better social skills as well. So the present bias makes us want to seek out a quick dopamine release. And this is where things like checking our phone comes in, or our emails every 20 minutes, or watching a quick episode of something like Netflix, or scrolling through various different reels and posts on Instagram, or watching a video of someone doing a silly dance on TikTok. These things don't require much effort, and they give us a very quick release of dopamine. We can do them right now, and they give us that little kind of nice feeling. They all fuel the present bias. But the thing is, and here's the kicker, when it comes to creating anything of note in life, fueling the present bias like this just doesn't cut it. Creating something meaningful requires us to focus and concentrate for longer periods of time, especially on single tasks. It requires us to stick with something even though we're not getting that instant hit, that instant gratification. I remember when I was learning to play the guitar quite a few years ago, the first 2 months was basically me complaining about having sore and cut fingers and not being able to produce anything of note or anything that is in any way recognisable. But then after that, when things started to click, it brought me so much pleasure, satisfaction and joy. And that is the thing. To create anything of significant value, whether it be a body of work, whether it be a business, whether it be in your working life on a project, whether it be, developing and improving a skill, it will require us to do the opposite of the present bias. We need to prioritise future rewards and delayed gratification. There's an amazing book that you have to check out. It's called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he says that we live in a world that is constantly out to distract us. Multiple sources are demanding our attention all at the same time. But we also live in a world that values depth of work, where we spend a reasonable portion of time creating something meaningful and focusing on a single task. And pretty much all high achievers or anyone who's accomplished anything of note has taken time and effort to really focus on what it is that they're doing. They've had to endure lots of struggle and challenge in the beginning until eventually they created something deep and something meaningful. If they were constantly chasing after that instant high, then they wouldn't have managed to create what they did. So you have to discipline yourself to think long term. It can be quite tricky, I know, but the benefits in the long term are just absolutely massive. So you want to have a think, what is it that you want to create in your work, but also just in life in general? And then invest time in creating that. Don't get pulled into the game of instant gratification, because you'll end up just going round and round in circles, chasing the next shiny object, only to end up back at square one. So that is toxic game number 4. And the fifth and final one for this episode is online dehumanization. Okay, this is a big one. This is actually one I've been wanting to get off my chest for quite a while, so this is going to be quite therapeutic for me. So online dehumanization is where, as the term suggests, you treat people online, so on forums or social media, with almost zero respect. You view them as being less than human simply because they're not in the room with you right now. And you think you can get away with being abusive and pretty much saying anything about them publicly. So this is something that many people fall into at some stage, surprisingly. I'm not just referring to online trolls here. Maybe you've beat someone down and got personal on a Facebook thread because you don't agree with their opinion, or you've got into a written shouting match on a forum and you've said some things that you just wouldn't say if you met them in person. Or maybe you've left a scathing review of something that goes way beyond constructive feedback. These are all examples of online dehumanization, where you forget that there is actually a real person behind the screen that's going to be reading it. So just to share a story of this, so I like to dance in my spare time. I do Latin dancing. So I'm part of a WhatsApp thread that shares information about events and classes. So there are about 600 people on this thread. It can be very busy, a little bit crazy, a little bit hectic. So a few months back, someone posted a comment on the thread that a lot of people disagreed with, myself included. Now, I'm not going to share the details of what the post was, but it was a comment that was, should I say, a little bit tone deaf, and it was certainly very poorly expressed, and it triggered quite a few people. So things escalated extremely quickly, as they tend to do online, and before you knew it, this guy was being publicly shamed, ridiculed, and his whole personality was pretty much being attacked. And it was all based on one single comment. Now, the thing is, I didn't agree with the comment. It didn't sit right with me at all. But equally, I was slightly horrified to see the response from everybody in the group. Basically turned into the WhatsApp thread version of Lord of the Flies within about 30 minutes. And the person who posted the comment was eventually thrown out of the group. He was pretty much socially ostracised. Now, the next day, extra information was revealed, and it transpired that the person who posted it was on the autistic spectrum and also had some learning difficulties. So his issue was that he really struggled to judge social situations and know the right things to say, and he would make a lot of social faux pas. Now, while that doesn't absolve him of all responsibilities, it is mitigating circumstances, and it also went a long way to explaining the original post that he'd commented. But the people in the group, they weren't privy to this information, and at the time, they didn't really care. They were too caught up in the frenzy of this online pile-on. In fact, it was getting close to bullying, and that's the point I want to make here. Because we aren't in the same room as people when we're online, it just feels okay to do or say what we want, because there are no immediate repercussions. We can't see the consequences, and we also can't see the human being that's behind the screen, the human being that has flaws, issues, potentially massive challenges that they're dealing with. We end up dehumanizing them. So you don't want to get caught up in this toxic game. It might make you feel significant and justified at the time, but you can end up causing quite a lot of damage unbeknown to you, out of sight. It is a zero-sum game. Also, it is, again, a monumental waste of energy. I mean, if you think about it, how many times have you actually changed someone's mind by shouting them down online? I'd be willing to guess that it's never. In fact, I would suggest that it often does the opposite. It backs the other person into a corner and makes them even more certain about their views. So why do it? It's totally pointless. You can spend that energy and time elsewhere. And I know it's easy to get caught into these things. I've done it myself. But anytime you do, just realise that this is a toxic game, and most likely no good will come from it. So there we have it, 5 toxic games you don't want to be drawn into. Even though it can be super tempting, you want to avoid these as much as you can. So let's do a review. Number 1, the blame game. Number 2, putting other people down to make you feel good or you feel significant. Number 3, malicious gossip. Number 4, instant gratification. And number 5, online dehumanization. So that is all for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did get value from it, then I would love it if you could follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, if possible, if you could leave a review, that would be massively appreciated. It really does help get the word out. So thank you once again for listening, and I'll speak to you later on.